Hello, everyone. Dr. Bryant T. Marks here. It is Sunday, May 31st, 2020, and wanted to take a little bit of time to provide my reactions to the George Floyd situation. Been watching the protests and in some situations riots go on in different cities across the country. I was quite disturbed by the incident, as were many of you, and folks reached out, hey, you should respond. So we're going to do a series of videos. This is actually not the orientation video. This is just some content I wanted to get out there just because I was sort of full and just wanted to share. So I was trying to figure out what should I do, but I'll do what's in my wheelhouse, right? Give content in a flavorful fashion. That's what I try to do. That's evidence-based from a scientific perspective. All right, so let's get in here. Let's go ahead and share the screen. All right. Okay. All right, so the series is called Bias by Us, meaning that all human beings have bias in various forms and it takes various shapes. Now, given what's happening, we're going to focus in on the bias between law enforcement and the Black community. So myth busting, the impact of misperceptions of bias on the relationship between police and African Americans. I am Reverend Dr. Bryant Marks, Senior, Chief Equity Officer and Lead Trainer at the National Training Institute on Race and Equity, known as NTIRE, and a tenured professor of psychology at Morehouse College in Atlanta. All right, so let's go ahead and get into it, folks. I want to give you a bit of context. It's one thing to have beliefs, have experiences, have emotions. It's another thing to actually have access to the data and solid information. And so in this series, the myth-busting series under Bias by Us, each video will address a particular myth. So this myth is that only police hold negative stereotypes of Black males. That actually is not true. Okay. Now, the impact of police holding these biases can be significant and in some cases lead to somebody losing their life, but it's bigger than that. So let's go ahead and dig in. Now, before I show you this. All right. So when we do our training, so I train all across the country. I trained over 30,000 police officers across the country, touched over 2,000 police departments. I've done training for the White House, the Department of Justice, Department of Education. So I've been around the country. We have a national footprint. And in our trainings, a lot are with police officers. Some are with prosecutors, probation, corrections. So we do a lot of work with criminal justice. But when we have our trainings of police officers, we ask them certain questions. And certain questions through a polling system where they respond in real time on their devices in the room. Okay, so I'm going to show you the results. I'm going to show you the question and then the results that we ask pretty commonly in our law enforcement trainings. So the question is, when Americans think of young Black males, what words or phrases come to mind? Now, remember, I said that we all have certain biases. Now, these biases play out differently depending on our roles, but the notion is this question that we're putting here, I actually ask this not only to law enforcement, but to everybody else, doctors, nurses, public defenders, Black men, everybody in our trainings, we usually ask this question. Okay, so I'm going to show you some results from a particular group of respondents. And the results actually, why don't you do this right now in your own head? When Americans think of young Black males, what words, traits, phrases, characteristics do you think come to mind? Just go with your gut, sort of what comes to mind, right? So I'm going to show you some results and then we'll break this down. All right, so now these, what you see here, are typical. As you can see, just go ahead and peruse, go through all the ones, go across, so as you'll conclude about 90% of them are negative, maybe 5% neutral, 5% positive. Most popular answers given: dangerous, criminal, aggressive, thug, angry. Okay, so we asked this question because we want to understand how people perceive that society views young Black males, right? So that's why we do this. We do this with everyone. So a couple of things though. So looking at these traits, go ahead and look at it, take it all in. I know it's a little heavy, take it all in, okay? Folks, these are the typical responses. The top 5 answers, we've done this over 700 times. The top 5 answers that we receive across the country: dangerous, thug, criminal, rapper, athlete. Those are your top 5 across the country, right? We've done this many, many times, okay? Now, some of y'all are saying, oh, that's awful, all these negative traits and so forth. I can't believe it. You're feeling all guilty. Don't feel guilty. But here is what I need you to do. I need us to develop our empathy muscle. What do I mean? I need you looking at the screen, look at these words. Here's what I'd like you to do. I need you to literally imagine yourselves walking through life with this as your personal brand. That when people thought of you, yes, you, they literally thought this. Please make it personal. You walk into the office building for the interview, this walks in with you. You walk into the bank for the loan, this walks in with you. You walk down the street past that police officer, this walks with you. You walk into the office hours of that professor seeking help, this walks in with you. Literally imagine if when people thought of you, yes, you, make it personal, they thought this, and what your life would be like. Now, two things. Number one, this is not a guilt moment. I don't want anyone feeling guilty. This is an empathy moment. Can you see the world through the eyes of someone different than you just for a moment and imagine what that would be like? Also, please note, I did not ask you what you personally believe. You may not personally believe any of this, but that wasn't the question. The question was, when Americans think of young black males, what words or phrases, traits, or characteristics come to mind for them? Your ability to fill up this slide with these words, or the people who responded, their ability to fill up this slide with these words, does not necessarily reflect that which they personally believe, but it does reflect that to which they've been exposed. It is in there and it's in your system, whether you know it or not. And from a social cognition perspective, social means other people. Cognition is how we mentally process information. So social cognition is how we mentally process information about other people. So whether you know it or not, when you see another human being and you categorize them according to race, gender, age, whatever, the traits that you associate with those categories become activated just by seeing those people at a subconscious level. And once activated, those traits can influence how you, whether you speak to that person, whether you hire that person, how you engage with that person, do you pull them over, or how do you treat them when they're on the ground and you have them subdued? And do you keep pressing down on their neck or not? Those sorts of things can come into play, okay? Again, folks, this is not a character issue. This is an exposure issue. What do I mean? Here are the two ingredients. Let me back up. I teach bias, implicit and explicit. Explicit is conscious dislike, right? Prejudice, racism at a conscious, explicit level. Implicit is subconscious associations between a group and a trait that can influence how you think, feel, and behave toward them, okay? So when we see a person, these traits get activated, it can influence our behavior, whether we know it or not. It's in all of us. All of us have the ability to act on our biases. Some do, some don't, depending on the situation and what can offset these traits. I'll take you deeper though. Imagine this, right? Imagine people thought this about you, but it wasn't true. Imagine the psychic and mental energy it would take for you to live your life day to day, constantly trying to disprove this. No, boss, I'm not like that. No, officer, I'm not like that. No, teacher, I'm not like that. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. No, I'm not. To be in a perpetual, ongoing state of trying to disprove people's misperceptions of you and your group. Folks, that can be exhausting, like a part-time job, right? You've been feeling it for a minute and a half, 2 minutes. You feel the weight of it. Imagine if this was the totality of your existence, and it wasn't true. Yes, a subset of this is true for a subset of black males, but not the vast majority. You look at the overall negative pattern, it doesn't apply to most black males. Show me the data. You can't, because it doesn't exist. I study black males. Empathy, not guilt, all right? So I'm not saying that what happened in terms of George Floyd's situation was all implicit bias. We know that blatant racism and sexism and ageism exists, absolutely, in various forms. But we must also understand by having a brain and living in this society, we've all been overexposed to groups and traits. And at a certain point, upon repeated exposure, your mind will lock in that association subconsciously. You will not know when it happens. But when it does happen, the seed for bias is planted. It may blossom, it may not, but it's there, okay? But when I talk to police officers, and these can be some awkward conversations, to be clear, if you're doing this work, diversity, equity, inclusion, implicit bias at a deep level, the conversations will likely be awkward and uncomfortable and messy and emotional and difficult. Just deal with it, all right? It's going to happen. Why? Because when you're talking about these things with fidelity and authenticity and some depth, you're going to challenge how people were raised, what their parents taught them, the schools they went to, and how they view the world. And that could be unsettling for a lot of people. All right. Now, some people shut conversations down when it becomes tense. Don't do that. Work through it. On the other side of that awkwardness and that tension can be growth and development, but you work through it with respect and in love. Okay. But yes, blatant racism exists. Absolutely. It has throughout the history of this country. As a matter of fact, when we look at these traits, this is an historical set of characteristics. What do I mean? You could probably go back to 16, 19, 17, 19, 18, 19, and 19, and so forth, and have the same traits associated with Black people, and particularly Black males. And what I have to communicate to my law enforcement colleague is that, historically speaking, in the South, the people that would eventually become law enforcement, police officers, their primary function, before formal policing was done and during slavery, the primary function of the people who eventually became cops was what? To recapture runaway slaves. What is the purpose? What is the job of police officers? To protect life and property. What were slaves back in the day? Property. Exactly. Right? So let's not be naive. This stuff is not new. So we're talking about solutions. We have to own the fact that we live in a society where this group and these traits have been associated for hundreds of years. It's in all of us. Some of us act on it, some of us don't. Some of us have information to offset this, and some of us don't. Okay? All right, so last example. I did some training. I had a Black woman come to me one time. She's like, Dr. Marks, this really hit me. I was really affected by it. I said, why? She said, okay, well, when I was pregnant, I did not want to find out the sex of my child until I gave birth, right? You know how some people do that. So she says, I'm in the delivery room, and the nurse says, you have a beautiful baby girl. And she said, I had an overwhelming sense of relief that I was not having a Black male child because of this stuff that's out there. And I've heard that story more than once from Black women. I had a white woman coming to me, bawling, crying, there's tears streaming down her face. I'm like, ooh, what's going on? Right? So she's like, well, I'm in an interracial marriage. I am married to a Black man. We have a biracial son who functions and presents in the world as a Black male. And so I never thought about his existence in this way until I saw those words on the screen. I mean, crying, bawling, asking me for advice on how to raise her Black male child. Now, here's the deal, folks. I never know who's in the room, right? She didn't have a stamp on her forehead, like married to a Black dude. I mean, she looked like a regular white woman. I mean, you know what I mean? Like regular white woman, like nothing to suggest she's married to a Black dude. But I never know who's in the room, right? So these things can be complicated and very interesting at the same time. All right, so we have these traits that are out there, all right? And again, folks, what you see on the screen is normal. Matter of fact, these responses did not come from police officers. These responses are from a group of public school teachers in the Northeast. 247 responses, so it might have been about 150 people in the room. They could respond twice. Public school teachers, not cops, okay? All right, so how do we undo this? People are like, well, the bias is out there. We have, excessive use of force. We have these instances. What do we do about it? It's historical, it's societal, institutional, a lot of layers, but at the same time, we need to start somewhere. So you see these traits on the screen about young Black males, but then what I do afterwards is I show them this, okay? So this is where I work. This is Morehouse College's graduation. So when we ask the question, how can implicit bias be managed or reduced? Balance of exposure is key. What do I mean? Morehouse College is the only predominantly Black male college in the world. Okay. My son is here.
Can I be in this video?
Okay, just say hello real quick.
Hi.
Say hi to the camera. Okay.
Hi.
All right. He's a future Morehouse man. All right, let me finish up. Okay, I'm almost done. You want to stay here while I finish? Okay. All right. Morehouse College is the only predominantly Black male college in the world. Okay. Our alumni include Samuel L. Jackson, Spike Lee, Julian Bond, Jay Johnson, and most notably, Martin Luther King Jr. So this is what I see on what we call every third Sunday in May, on what we call a Red Clay Hill in Georgia. 400 to 500 Black males walk across the stage onto greatness. Morehouse College is the top feeder Black male undergrads, the Harvard Business School, in terms of Black males, Harvard Business School, Harvard Law School, Wharton Business School, Yale Law School. We have more Rhodes Scholars, Black male undergrads, than any other institution in the world. Okay. When I think of a young Black male between the age of 17 and 23, I think this. I literally have to struggle to think of a young Black male in that age category that is not a college student. I'm no better than you. I just been on this campus for 15 years, overexposed to Black male achievement. In my mind, Black male equals achievement. They're synonyms. So when my students come into my office hours and I say, what are you doing next year? What are you doing this summer? They say, oh, this summer I have an internship at the White House, at NASA, I'm going to Goldman Sachs, London School of Economics, Harvard Law School. That's a normal day for me at Morehouse. Nothing special about that day. That's a normal day for me. But here's the deal. Whether you ever step 1 foot on Morehouse College's campus or not, you need to know intellectually that this place exists. That there is a place in this world where over 2,000 Black males are getting together in a concentrated fashion, and it's not because they're in prison. There is a place in this world where over 2,000 Black males are getting together in a concentrated fashion, doing something constructive and productive. It's called Morehouse College. Just knowing this place exists serves as a data point to counter the negative narrative that surrounds young Black males. Just knowing this place exists. So how do we undo these biases in society, amongst police and everybody else? Balance of exposure. Now, sometimes we can be intentional about that to which we expose ourselves. We can go to Morehouse, we can read certain things, watch certain shows. But some people live lives where by happenstance, if they're not Black, they may not come across this. Or even if they are Black, they may not come across this consistently. So yes, there's implicit and there's the explicit. But in terms of trying to figure out how these things work, it's a big picture, it's historical, it's institutional, all those things we talked about. But I just wanted to give you some ideas, some insight, a different perspective, a different way to look at this. So please look out. We have some other videos coming up. Follow us on social and stay safe out there. We know we have the virus out there. So those who decide to protest, please be safe. And please understand, as we go forward with this work, as we try to figure out what to do next, the emotion is great and that's wonderful and that's needed. But we also need to identify a certain set of facts from which we can have a constructive, objective conversation. Right? We have to have that combination, that balance of the emotional, the passion, the drive, along with some concrete strategies that are evidence-based. Thank you all. Have a great day.
So you're done?